Outside that window, that Pádraig Pearse and his brother must have cycled from Rathfarnham on the way to the GPO, and that's what I keep saying to the kids. Those two fellas were doing something. They weren't doing it for themselves. They had some vision, and that's what they need to have. Well, first of all, it brings me back to when I was a child in primary school, 66, with a national school in Cavan. Very prominent in the room was the proclamation and the leaders of the 1916 Rising. And I do remember specifically that Clark had a moustache exactly like our school principal. But funny enough, the flag was never present, but the proclamation was, and it was something that has stuck with me. I also lived on a border town in Cavan and was interested in how, as a people, we could conduct our daily affairs while thousands of people were being killed just across the border. That stuck with me. It also stuck with me with my father going to funerals when he couldn't go inside the church gate because it had been prohibited. And these were friends of his who had worked with him in farming. And it just seemed rather strange and rather peculiar to a child. Coming home from school as well too, there were a few flagstones on the Protestant church. I was brought up a Catholic, that if you stepped on, they were known as the devil's spit. So I grew into an Ireland that was obviously very insular from the control of the Catholic Church, and also full of mythologies and myths that kept people apart rather than together. So I've been involved in education since, leaving from social science, and set up two Educate Together schools. And as a Catholic, I am principal of a Protestant school not too far from here in Rathgar. And so we are looking at how we can celebrate and talk about the 1916 Rising with a group of people who are from a very disparate background. And so we at the moment are exploring ways of doing that. And one of the ways we are doing it is through ritual rather than talk. And that is by all of the families and children bringing in clay from their garden at home, hand printing it, mixing it together as classes, and mixing it together as a school community, and putting it in the garden and growing something decent out of what is an imprint in the clay of Ireland. It has gone to a second part, so that's the local context. The wider context is that they're gathering the clay in from all the counties in Ireland. So we will have a ritual on the day of dance and work with the clay of all of Ireland in 32 bags, ready to be mixed in a big urn in the middle of the hall. And the children are divided up into 4 provinces. And the middle one is the 5th province, which you may or may not know that the Irish for province is Cuig. So the 5th province is the one of imagining what happens when Kerry clay is stuck beside Armagh clay, and Armagh clay is speaking to Galway clay, and Galway clay is speaking to Wexford clay. What happens in that context? So in some way, using the mythology or the imagination is to try to forge a new way of imagining Ireland, abandoning some of the talk. A bit like the end of the Friedel play, Dancing at Lunasa. When language, is gone, what do? You dance. One of the parents is going to make a map of Ireland, right, and is going to draw out all the counties, and they're going to put the natural clay or indigenous clay onto the counties. And one of the kids, who's a champion Irish dancer, is going to get up and dance on the map, and hopefully the clay will mix through each other into one marvellous celebration of dance. Clay has memory. Clay, if you put it on a what do you call it, when you're spinning it, if you don't get the spinning right, it turns back on its own memory. So there's no better thing than to have the memory of clay, because it has witnessed all sorts of revolutions, it has witnessed peace, it has witnessed blood, everything. So how do we collect in diaspora clay? How do we make them part of a mound? How do we create a mound that has, Islamic hands in it, black hands, white hands. Because if that happens, then anybody that has their hand in it can say, most definitely, my hand is in this Irish soil and nobody can take it out. I do think that we can be very holier than thou about it. My own personal history was of a grandfather who was in the RIC. I've spoken to people today who've had so many different routes by which they came to be in Ireland and to be Irish. And what we're doing in school at the moment, the children are collecting those stories. And there's some fascinating stories, including ones like where somebody yesterday brought in that my family are from Northern Ireland and we have no allegiance to anybody else except the United Kingdom. And then there's a man who is from it's a Protestant tradition in Tyrone, and I said to him, I hope you're bringing in the clay. He says, I'll bring it from my part of Tyrone, not from somebody else's. And so there's a great sense of that you get coming into play the whole conversation around territory and land and earth. And so when they talk about boundaries, it's the one I go back to where I was born, the idea of a boundary and a border. They're very significant things when you grow up along one. And I think that if I had a mission, is to kind of break down some of those boundaries and allow people to cross lines that they're not allowed to do. I suppose the first time really contemplating the violence and the bloodshed. And one thing that I can say is that when I stood beside Gerry Adams at a count in Cavan when I was backing a PAYE candidate, I looked at him and I felt afraid because of what had been said about him. I don't have any allegiance to any political party, but I do know that he and others, same on the other side, on the unionist side, that they had witnessed horrific violence against them and against their people. And I wonder if I had somebody raiding my house in the middle of the night, would I stand up and fight back, and would I use physical force? I'd have to say that I think I would. I wouldn't let my son or my children, anything happen to them. So we have to see what has happened in the past, that where that has been, almost a necessary thing to do, to stand up, stand your ground. But then when it's glorified as a way of resistance all the time, I certainly share far more the whole idea of, incisive, think clearly, see clearly. Ben Ockery, the African poet, said that, for the overground to be different, you've got to understand the underground. And the underground of things is knowing more, finding out more what people know, and that there is then a different way of doing things. But I think that anything that is lacking in imagination has no future. One of the things I feel bereft at the moment of in the country is that there is no leader. There is no vision being promulgated. The economy is everything. That's what they talk about, the economy. There is nobody do it. And it takes that unleashing of a leader who, the poet Blake said, if you're in a passion, some good you may do, but no good at all if the passion is in you, which was, there's no point in me going around passionate unless there's somehow some identification and community and a purpose. And it generally is for the betterment of mankind and humankind, and protecting the earth and protecting each other. One of the things the kids are doing in relation to the revival of the Irish language, which I was at a conference recently for principals, which was absolutely bereft of any vision. But we've decided that in relation to having an earth ritual on the day of mixing clay, that we're dedicating the wider context or further afield is about protecting the earth. So the children, there's 98 in the school, they're all taking on the names of animals, plants, insects, birds. So there was one boy the other day, Frank from Poland, and I asked him his name, and he said that his name was Frank Joseph Red Admiral Butterfly Féileacán Jarog Sokolowski O'Grady. And I thought to myself, he's deadly serious. He gets it. So to protect the earth, we have to make nature manifest by holding the names of nature in our mouths. And those children, from learning Irish and English, and hopefully Latin, the older ones, that they will be seduced by language. And there's some chance of language, energetic language taking a foothold. But I'm really looking forward to them on the day with bow-rounds. We've got about 50 bow-rounds that hopefully the children will we might, because it's in March, we will re-invoke a different marching season to have just a different way of playing with what's traditions on this island, but hopefully that the marchers will meld with each other and not melee into each other. And so that's the bit of mayhem. You're more than welcome to come with your camera on the 16th to Zion School, which sounds Jewish, but it's Church of Ireland School in Rathgar in Dublin. And to remember that outside that window, that Pádraig Pearse and his brother must have cycled from Rathfarnham on the way to the GPO, and that's what I keep saying to the kids. Those two fellas were doing something. They weren't doing it for themselves. They had some vision, and that's what they need to have.